Yeah, many testimonies, many feedback situations in the country. Also, the failed attempt by Obama to reform the American bits and so forth. So de toute façon, la Commission, quoi qu'elle fasse, les États membres sont pas contents, le Parlement n'est pas content, le public n'est pas content. Comme le disait un ancien directeur que j'ai dit, c'est le problème des pouvoirs publics. Il n'y a jamais personne qui va dire « Oh, quel joli pont vous avez construit ». Tout le monde va dire « Le pont est inutile, le pont a coûté trop cher, le pont a... »
La Tour Eiffel qui a presque partie patrimoine, quoi.
C'est vrai qu'on est... Mais moi, je trouve qu'on y est... Moi, je sens qu'on est un peu between a rock and a hard place. Parce que je trouve qu'on a quand même encore pas mal de considérations un peu conflictuelles entre les États membres, le Parlement. Moi, je suis quand même très curieux de voir ce qu'on va arriver à conclure quand on aura les premiers accords conclus. Ce qui va se passer d'un côté avec les Friends et de l'autre avec les... avec le Parlement quand même.
Au niveau des Friends, ça change quand même.
Ça évolue positivement quand même. Hein.
Parce qu'il y a un peu un assouplissement. Mais j'étais pas surpris comme Christine.
Everybody's looking very expectant. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I hear that you've had 2 very interesting days already. I myself was in Ireland at a festival called Kilkenomics, which was a comedy economics festival. It's actually quite appropriate considering what's going on at the moment. And actually the only thing that anybody could agree on was that economics is a mystery and none of the numbers are to be trusted and we really don't know what's going to happen. So I really hope that this panel is going to be a little bit different from that. We have some excellent speakers here. And I think it's one of the few occasions where we really do have somebody from the Commission and somebody from the Member States who are going to be able to answer a lot of your questions, which I'm sure you have. But we're going to start with Mark Maas, who is a trade policy director? Officer. He's very modest. For a Belgian umbrella NGO called 11-11-11. And unlike most other NGO workers, Mark has in fact never abandoned trade policy, as so many others have, when Doha lost interest from everybody. And so he's been following this for 15 years and knows pretty much everything about everything, I would imagine. And he's going to start off with a little presentation and probably a little bit of criticism of what the EU's trade policy is up to these days. And then we're going to follow on with Leopoldo Rubinacci, who is the head of unit at the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade. And he looks after, he's head of unit for trade, for investment and services, is that right? And he's also been around for a long time and previously was in charge of bilateral relations with Russia, the former Soviet states, and the Balkans. And finally, we have Pascal Buffin, who is a career diplomat for Belgium. I think probably what he has to say will be quite interesting because Belgium and China are in a tricky situation where investment is concerned. With a bilateral investment treaty currently under negotiation, is that right? But not in fact completely sealed, probably to your great relief. Because there's an issue with Chinese people investing in Fortis, which, as you know, has been nationalized. So as you know, the issues are the European Commission, the European Union has now centralized its investment policy with everything that entails. Also, what Europe is going to do about the 1,200 bilateral investment treaties that the member states have between one another and with other countries. The member states aren't generally very happy about this. The European Parliament is so worried about it that, in fact, we don't have a speaker here. It's probably saying it a little bit too much. But there are a lot of tensions about it. At the same time, obviously, all of you gathered here shows that there is a big concern about how a new European investment policy is going to impact environmental and social concerns, especially with things going on with Canada, Singapore, India, and also nascent talks with China, and as Mark will tell you, other countries as well. So I think we'd better just get on. I'll hand you over to Mark.
Okay. Thank you. I was thinking of just...
Sorry, I'm sorry, I forgot something. One bit of housekeeping. If you need translation, Channel 4 is English, Channel 5 is Spanish. We'll do a little presentation by everybody. They'll have a little discussion among themselves, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks. No, I was going to give 3 points of principle and then 3 points that have to do with the current state of play in the, let's say, preparations for a European investment policy. Points of principle. We think that bilateral investment treaties are very unbalanced in favor of corporate rights and undermining policy space of governments. We are especially concerned with the investor-state dispute settlement. We think it's quite unacceptable that sovereignty has been given up to accommodate corporate interests. And also we see that the way that the investor-state arbitration works, there's no transparency, there's no possibility to appeal. Governments are not even allowed to speak about cases that are being filed against them, and so forth. Second important point is that we are also very concerned about corporate behavior. We have a number of people here from Latin America who have many experiences with bad practices by also European foreign investors. And so whereas foreign investors can sue governments for general policies, citizens cannot sue multinationals internationally for their misbehavior. And thirdly, which is a general concern with the whole trade policy, that is the lack of transparency actually and consultation that is connected with the trade policy. Debates about mandates are behind closed doors. The mandates themselves are supposed to be secret documents. Negotiating texts are never disclosed by the Commission. Actually, public only gets to see the result of these negotiations that surrender sovereignty when everything is said and done. So we will continue to fight this way of concluding international agreements in general and these kinds of agreements especially. Then, about the current state of the play. Actually, when we approached some of the member states, let's say in the middle of 2009, they were even denying that Article 207 meant that there would be a transfer of competence and that in the future the European Union would be competent for negotiating investment treaties. It's amazing to see that the Lisbon Treaty comes into force the 1st of December 2009, and there are no transitionary measures. There's no agreement on what actually the article means. There's some member states who actually are quite opposed to the content of the article. So it makes you wonder, why they ratified the agreement. We thought that the Irish Prime Minister was the only one who hadn't read the Lisbon Treaty, but apparently there were many more. Since the agreement is into force, we see that a number of countries have chosen to self-impose a moratorium. They're no longer negotiating bilateral investment treaties. Others, I think Belgium isn't that the case, they are hurrying to finalize what they are still negotiating. While the treaty gives the competence to the Union, the European Court of Justice obliges member states to renegotiate their existing bids. Some are doing that, some are not doing that, and so forth. I think the situation is pretty messy, and that's actually pretty surprising for such a sophisticated bloc of countries as the European Union. So we wonder if anybody is still seeing clearly in what the situation actually is and is giving any direction to it. Second point there is that we have seen how the member states behaved in the past discussions. Incredibly conservative. Very anxious that the European investment policy would become any different from what they have in their own bilateral investment treaties. afraid that even a single comma would be changed because this would undermine the legal security of their foreign investors. And we have seen member states lobbying in the European Parliament even more than the industry and more than the international lawyers who make money out of the international arbitration. So this is maybe a question that Mr. Buffin could answer. What is happening with the member states? Why do they refuse to see some of the flaws in the system at least? Why do they refuse to draw lessons from how many years, 15, 16 years of investor-state practice? It is really amazing. I don't know what got into them and who is driving their positions. And thirdly, when the Commission came out with its communication in June 2010, there were some interesting things in that communication. At least the Commission recognized that there were problems with the investor-state dispute settlement. And at least the Commission made reference to issues like OECD guidelines and corporate social responsibility, things you don't find in the member states' bids. But the reaction from the Council to that was, in the Council conclusion taken under the Belgian presidency, they were silent about that. The only thing that you can find in the Council conclusion was European investment policy has to resemble our own bid policy, and that is it. And also in the mandate that the Council gave for negotiations with Canada, India, and Singapore, there's not a iota about reforming the investor dispute, the state dispute settlement. So the question to the Commission would be, given also the fact that the European Parliament has been calling for reforms in its resolution, is the Commission now going to bury some of those ideas that it expressed in its communication, or is it still going to try in the negotiating text that is going to table to put some elements of reform into it? So that's three practical remarks, I would say, on top of three principal remarks, and you're welcome to react to any of those. Thank you.
I think we'll move on to hear what Leopoldo has to say about that. It would be very interesting, in fact, to hear what you think the Commission can do to actually make something better out of Europe's investment policy than what there is in existence at the moment, especially considering that you're currently negotiating with India, Singapore, and Canada, and that you are using investment potentially as a development tool, particularly where Northern Africa is concerned.
Thank you very much, Julian, and thanks, Mark, for these comments. At the outset, I know that the organizers initially invited a colleague of mine who is actually very versed in dispute settlement, and but he couldn't make it, so we've decided that I would come. I'm not an expert in investor-to-state dispute settlement, but I would certainly be very happy to contribute to the discussion. Before I answer the questions and the remarks from Mark, I would just like to take a step back and remind, if you want, where we are and where we're going. Now, the Treaty of Lisbon actually does two very important things in trade, and the first one is that it gives the European Parliament powers. The Parliament becomes co-legislator. And that is a very important development because it will give the EU trade policy a much greater democratic accountability. The second thing, indeed, is that it transfers what Article 207 refers to foreign direct investment under the scope of the common commercial policy. Now, there are some elements which are new there and others which are not. The European Union has already been negotiated a lot about investment and commercial presence abroad, even before the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. The General Agreement on Trade in Services in the WTO covers the foreign investment abroad to perform services, and the EU has negotiated in its bilateral trade agreements conditions for the access to foreign markets for investors, and not only in services. At the same time, the member states retained the responsibility and the competence to negotiate not only the promotion of investment abroad, but also the protection of the admitted investments. Now, with the change in the Lisbon Treaty, if you want, at the EU level, we can close the gap. We can not only negotiate accessions to the markets, but we can also negotiate the protection of investments once they have been acceded in the market. So this is good, we think, because we take the view that foreign direct investment in general is good for development, both for the EU development and for the third countries' developments. And if you want, it allows to give now a complete offer in matters of investment. As Mark says, the Treaty of Lisbon does not foresee any transitional periods or any transitional measures. So we have found ourselves with 1,200 bilateral investment treaties of the member states, which remain valid in international law, but which pose a question about their validity in EU law because of this new competence. The decision that has been taken and which has been supported by all the institutions is that these agreements need to be guaranteed the legal security in the EU, because they're simply too important to protect the economic interest of the EU operators. Today, according to the UNCTAD statistics, the total stock of foreign direct investment of the EU abroad is something like $9,000 billion. So we're talking really about a lot of money. And we're talking really about expectations by the business that these agreements would be protected. So the first thing the Commission has done, alongside the, if you want, the presentation of the policy aims in its communication that Mark referred to, is to present a proposal for a regulation of the Council and the Parliament, which does two things. One, it lays down the mechanism whereby the member states' BITs would be, if you want, protected in EU law. And two, it addresses what Mark was saying. It gives a procedure whereby, under certain strict conditions, the member states can continue to negotiate or renegotiate BITs despite this new exclusive competence. Why is that? We could have said, from Lisbon onwards, there is no negotiation by member states. The reality is that because of the scarce resources we have, and because we want to implement this new investment policy gradually, it is still important to foresee the possibility for member states to negotiate or renegotiate BITs. But this would be subject to a certain number of restrictive conditions, and I'll be happy to come back to that later on. This regulation is still being discussed by the Council and the Parliament. Discussions are not always extremely easy. So today we are basically in a gray zone period. Some member states indeed have been concluding agreements which they started to negotiate before the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. The Commission takes the view that the member states have to be aware of their treaty obligations when they do that. But also the regulation, in the way the Commission has proposed it, has as a cutoff date the date of entry into force of the regulation. In other words, the idea is that the agreements that would have been concluded before the entry into force of the regulation can be protected under EU law. In the communication, the Commission said, well, we have now an opportunity to include the protection of investment in our trade agreements. So why don't we start with three that we are currently negotiating? The one with Canada, the one with Singapore, and the one with India. So what the Commission has done is that it has recommended to the Council a modification of the existing negotiating directives to include also the protection of investment. So when you read the leaked negotiating directives about investment, of course you should read them in conjunction with the rest of the negotiating directives, which do provide, for example, for elements relating to sustainable development and so on, in line with the traditional and consistent EU policy in this respect. So the only thing that we have proposed to the Council is that we would be allowed, in addition to all the things that we have been negotiating so far, also to negotiate on the specific standards of investment protection. So now we have this authority to negotiate, and we are starting to engage in the negotiations with Canada, India, and Singapore. I think it is too early to say where we will end up with in these negotiations, but certainly the view we are taking is that, one, there should be coherence and consistency between investment protection and the overall aims of the EU external policy. And two, we cannot go back. The member states' BITs afford a certain level of protection to investors, which is considered to be important. And we do not want, in having agreements at EU level, to go back from this level of protection. So this is what we need to see and how we're going to achieve that. Now, there is one element which is still missing, and it is the detail on how we're going to deal with dispute resolution. It is indeed a big novelty, the fact that all of a sudden the EU, because of this Lisbon Treaty, becomes also competent for dispute resolution and investor to state. But there are a large number of issues that still need to be resolved and addressed. The Commission indeed in its communication has identified a certain number of areas where it wants to work, and it stands by that. The negotiating directives do not say much. They simply say that there should be a system of investor-to-state dispute settlement in these agreements. So we need to continue the discussions with the member states and with the Parliament on these elements. It could well be that in the near future, in response to a call from the Parliament in its resolution on the communication, that the Commission proposes a further piece of legislation which would deal with the division of responsibilities on investor-to-state dispute settlement, and in particular on the very difficult question on who pays, is it the EU or the member states when confronted with cases. The reality is that this new competence in the Lisbon Treaty offers us a certain number of opportunities, but these opportunities will be implemented gradually. For the time being, we want to have a smooth transition. We want to reflect, we want to discuss, and certainly this sort of discussion and events as the one today, we think are very useful. So we look forward to a constructive discussion now, and then I will try to respond to some of Mark's questions later on.
Yeah, maybe later on. Well, let's move on to Pascal and what you have to say from the member state perspective.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I would like to come back to insist on what Leopold said regarding the investment and the first part, I mean, that what we are doing now at the EU level with the member states, because actually the EU takes care about investment. It's not something new. The Lisbon Treaty hasn't changed anything regarding that. Just the fact that now we have the investment protection issue that came on the table. And it raised some questions among the member states because many BIT models have the both aspects, investment protection and investment promotion. This is the case, for instance, for Belgium and Luxembourg. And actually, these are two separate issues to deal with, because the promotion part of it is not something new, as Leopold said. It's in the interest of the EU companies to invest abroad. It means jobs and opportunities for us. So the Lisbon Treaty hasn't changed anything regarding that. And the new aspect, the new part of the issue is the investment protection, as Leopold said. And on this issue, and Mark is right to say that the member states were very anxious regarding this change, because the Lisbon Treaty, in the Article 207, it's just a short sentence saying that now the FDIs, the foreign direct investment, are part of the trade policy, which is an exclusive competence of the EU, and that's it. Without any words regarding the transition, how we are going to develop, a new system based on EU treaties, and at the same time, we know by experience that it takes a long time to negotiate such BITs. Sometimes, more than 10 years. Recently, Germany, which is not certainly the smallest country in the EU, has finally concluded an agreement with Malawi after more than 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it takes time to negotiate, to have a result. And this is the concern, actually, of the member states. Because what is the purpose of these BITs is to give, certain legal certainty for investment and investors abroad, and in the sense that it takes time to invest, and a lot of money is at stake, of course, and so it's very important for them to be able to foresee the legal framework in which they will be able to invest abroad. And so the investment protection is not too mixed with the investment promotion, actually. We are, as member states, we are very conscious about the issue of, the protection of the international recognized rules on work from the ILO, for instance. And, but this is nothing new. It has nothing to do with investment protection, because look in, for instance, in the EU Korea agreement, FTA, that we concluded last year, which is actually the first agreement concluded after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. But actually the negotiations for this agreement started well before the Treaty of Lisbon. You have there a full chapter on sustainable development. And if I'm not mistaken, it's chapter 13. And when you compare this chapter, the content of it, with or BITs, and I think in particular with the Belgian one, the Belgian model, the FTA goes very far, well further than what we have in our BIT model, in a sense that the BIT model for Belgium, but I can guess it's the same for many EU countries, is that is just a best endeavor wishes, actually. It's not the case in the FTA. There you have structures with, regular meetings between the authorities, the two parties, and also with the participation of the civil society. And something totally new, and which is not present, you don't have in the BITs. So, but this is for...
Two seconds. Does everybody here know what an FTA is and what a BIT is? Put up your hands if you don't. Okay, you're fine. Sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Yes, we are with experts. Very good.
And so the member states are quite anxious that, and we saw that during the Belgian presidency, also with the Parliament and the INTA committee. INTA committee is the committee of the Parliament dealing with the international trade, and we saw that there was a lot of misunderstanding. The member states, and look at the conclusions mentioned earlier by Mark and adopted in October 2010, these conclusions are very clear. And but the fact is, for the member states, it doesn't matter the way we are going to protect the investment, but it has to be done on a pragmatic way and a smooth way. Because, as I said, it's not easy to negotiate such agreements with third countries. It's very difficult. We are very conscious that now we have a commitment of all the member states to have an EU policy. That means the same conditions for all the EU investors to avoid discrimination among the investors, but also in order to protect what does exist. It's very important. Once again, it doesn't mean anything regarding all the, let's call it, the social aspect of the investment issue, because it's dealt with another part of the agreement, be it a PCA, agreement of cooperation and partnership, or FTA, free trade agreement. And as another example, you have the EU-Colombia FTA, and they are very clear elements in this text, in this agreement, saying that all the international labor clauses, contained in the ILO treaties and so on, for instance, are considered as main issues for the agreement. That means that usually you have in an FTA, you have a dispute settlement mechanism foreseen there. And if there's a problem, the two parties commit to meet and to discuss this issue. But for some issues, when you have violation of such clauses, human rights, for instance, and we know that for Colombia it's a sensitive issue, and the Parliament is very attentive on that issue. And if there is something that we notice there, the EU can solely decide to suspend the agreement, not to go through the dispute settlement as foreseen in the FTA, in the text. So, I mean, when we speak about investment, let's see what we are doing right now to avoid any confusion is that to develop, as Leopoldo said, the investment protection aspect. But it doesn't mean that for the member states we are opposed, to changes in the investment policy, but seen broadly. And but the member states were very anxious because the Parliament, we could feel that they didn't have any experience on that, and the only ones around the tables that have actually the experience on investment protections are the member states. And so even the Commission doesn't have experience on that. So the member states were very afraid of taking a step too fast that will create problems for the investors, creating legal uncertainty. Because once again, when you read the conclusions, which is actually the official stance of the Council, it's very clear. The idea is to have let's try to have at least the same level of legal certainty protection for the investors through an EU agreement. And I refer also to the paragraph 17 of these conclusions, saying that this new policy has to be coherent with all the objectives and all the other EU policies. That means also development policies, for instance. So for the member states, it's very clear. But now we are in a negotiation process among ourselves, and it's true that some member states are maybe more afraid than others, because you can imagine some member states consider that they have a better BIT than the others, and some member states like Ireland, they don't have BITs. So if I may say, they don't care about the BIT, so the new issue actually. And so you have different situations among the member states, and that's why you have also the long discussion sometimes, and the Commission has made proposals and so on, and but it is going smoothly, but is going ahead, and step by step, it's something totally new. And we see also that some colleagues are not used with the new procedures. The decision process in the EU has changed with this Lisbon Treaty, and so we have to take that into account. So we have also, as member states, and the experts have to adapt themselves to this negotiation system. And a last thing regarding the lack of transparency and so on, regarding, for instance, the mandates, and I mean, it's for us quite obvious that these mandates have to remain confidential. When you negotiate with a partner, a third country, it's quite obvious. Or I mean, not only here we are talking about international relations, but it's the same on the private level. If you want to negotiate with a third partner, you do prefer that this third partner doesn't know your stance. What are your priorities? What you could accept? What you cannot accept? What are your red lines? Actually, with these mandates, that the member states have given to the Commission, this is the same idea. And at the same time, a mandate contains only broad ideas, the main lines of the future, text, which will contain then Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. Now, these are not we don't have this text. We don't have that. We're in the process. The Commission has the green light to negotiate with India, Singapore, and Canada. And so we will see, because we have to take into account also the wishes of the third parties. These are negotiations. The EU is not alone to say, look, you have to do this, this, and this because we have decided so. So it's a pragmatic process. It takes time, not only with the third parties, but inside, among the EU institutions. And with the Council, it takes time too, because all the member states have different situations. So, well, I hope I have already answered some questions, but I'm ready to give more information needed.
Thanks, Pascal. No, I think it's very helpful to have your immediate reaction to what Mark was saying, also on transparency and on investor state. Leopoldo, I think you had some points you wanted to make in response to Mark, and then we can bring it back to Mark, because I know Mark has been taking lots of notes to respond to your comments. And then we'll open it up.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, I think